أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين رحمة للعالمين بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون صلوا على محمد وآله. Can I request people to move forward? Not the chairs, but you move forward, because there's quite a few chairs which are empty here. And then what happens is that, we get interrupted during the majlis. So if you would kindly move forward a bit. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Thank you. Last night I was talking about the different forms of authority. That in order to be engaged, whether it is through the spiritual mode or whether the institutionalized mode, we all need authority. I talked about the charisma or charismatic authority of the Prophet, the authority that was inherited by the Imams, if you recall, the authority of the texts themselves, the book. They become authoritative because they are from Allah. They speak on behalf of Allah, or Allah speaks through them. We talked of the authority of the scholars, who become authoritative because of their ability to understand and interpret the text. And we talked also, if you recall, about the authority of the holy person or holy man, and the authority that is enshrined through the shrine itself. So different forms of authority. There was one email which I got, which I'd like to just respond to, whether the authority of the Prophet is sanctioned in the Quran itself. And the answer is, it is. Because the Quran says very clearly, Ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasul. Obey God and obey the Prophet. Ma atakumul Rasulu fakhudhuhu. Whatever the Prophet gives you, take it. Wa ma antahu fantahu. Wa ma nahu fantahu. Whatever he forbids you, therefore keep away from it. In other words, the authority in the Quran very clearly is located not only with God, but also with the Prophet himself. There was also one other misunderstanding that might have arisen, and sometimes when you are a speaker, you don't always realize that what you are saying might very easily be misconstrued. Someone come up and said, so you are telling us taqleed is not wajib. I never said that. I don't recall saying that. What I did say was this idea that if you don't do taqleed, then all your amal are batil, is a much later innovation or much later statement that was made by the ulama, extrapolated, in other words, derived based on aql, that in order for your actions to be accepted, they should be in accordance to the fatwa of a particular mujtahid. But this was a later understanding of the text. But I never ever said that taqleed is haram or is not wajib, as we shall see later on how it becomes wajib in itself. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So one of the most potent form or powerful form of engagement and the response to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reason and knowledge. As we are aware, reason or aql is very highly emphasized in the Quran. Indeed, wherever Muslims went, the first thing that they did was not only to build a mosque, but also a center of learning. You might be surprised to know that even in a place like Timbuktu, have you heard of Timbuktu? Contrary to popular opinion, it's not in Greenland, it's in a place called Mali, which is in that was the west of Africa. In the medieval ages, we're talking the 13th, 14th century, there were 25,000 students graduating from Islamic schools in Mali every year in Timbuktu. Over 180 centers of learning at the time when Europe thought that Africa was in the dark ages, and I have seen books written by scholars in that period of time. Africans were far more learned than Europeans were in the medieval ages, when, as I said, in the dark ages, when Europe was in the dark ages, Muslims flourished wherever they went. And therefore, if you look at the Muslim civilization, without going into great detail, whether Muslims went to Baghdad, whether they went to Uzbekistan, have you heard of Uzbekistan? Bukhara and Samarkand, Muslims had centers of learning there. In Cordoba, in Toledo, not in Toledo, Ohio, but Toledo in Spain. If you go there, you'll find that Muslims had centers of learning, whether it was Cairo. If you go to Marrakesh, you'll find Muslim centers of learning, and even in Europe. So Islam came with the understanding that in order to respond to Allah, you do it with knowledge. Indeed, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, when a person goes in search of knowledge, Allah opens the gate of paradise for him or for her. Learning, as we say, is also encouraged for women only, not for all men. That even the angels will lower their wings in respect of that alim, that person who searched for knowledge. The key component in knowledge, of course, is aql or reason. The word aql itself means to tie and to bind. In this sense, we are kind of bound to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Indeed, the way of entering religion is through understanding. You cannot say that I believe in God because my father or my Ayatollah said so. You have to understand yourself. In other words, the first movement in Islam is not the spiritual movement, not even the physical movement. It's the intellectual movement. The aql must move first more than anything else. And I think this is something that we need to emphasize not only to our younger generation, but also to those non-Muslims who seem to think that we are slavish imitators. Allah will not put a device in you telling you how important it is in the Quran. أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ أَفَلَا يَفْحَمُونَ. He asks you and then tells you not to use it. If Allah is asking you, why don't you ponder, why don't you think? It shows very clearly that He put that little device within you in order for you to use it. Indeed, aql precedes revelation. In other words, even before, as I've been saying, before Allah reveals anything, it is our aql which should tell us at least the basic values. Revelation in the form of the scripture, the Quran, etc., will come and give us the details. Can we have those who are coming in? There's quite a bit of space here in the front if they'd like to sit down. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So Allah will not ask you to do anything or contravene your aql. This is an important point. Now, it doesn't mean that, anything that we don't understand, we reject it. We are not experts. We may not necessarily reject a hadith because we don't understand it, but we certainly can question it. If you don't understand it, don't reject it, but ask about it. Question it. That's why Allah Himself is called Ra'isul Uqala. Uqala is the plural of aqil, one who understands. In other words, Allah is the head, if you like, or the president. Rais, as we know in Swahili called Raisi, it means the head, the president of the people who are what we call in Urdu aqalmand, people who understand. Therefore, there is a very important principle that many of us are not even aware. This is in a field called Usul al-Fiqh. Usul al-Fiqh is a field whereby it tells us how to derive the law, how to get the fatwas, the principles. We don't need to go into details, but this principle is very clear. كُلَّمَا حَكَمَ بِهِ الْعَقْلِ حَكَمَ بِهِ الشَّرْعِ. Whatever reason rules, the Sharia will rule likewise. In other words, Allah will not tell you in your aql one thing and then He gives a law which contravenes your aql. Because then you have a clash between your reasoning and the Sharia. So, كُلَّمَا حَكَمَ بِهِ الْعَقْلِ حَكَمَ بِهِ الشَّرْعِ. Whatever your reason tells you, the Sharia will tell you likewise. And as I've said, that just because we don't understand something does not mean that we reject it. There could be other reasons for it. But at least question it. This is the least that we can do. Islam, my friends, came to free our minds, not to freeze them in history. Aql not only helps us understand things, but believe it or not, even to create laws. Many of our laws are based on reason. And again, we may not know this because we are not experts in the field, but in many instances, when a mujtahid, for example, a scholar, wants to know what is the hukm, what is the ruling on a particular issue, normally it is a he, I'm afraid, we have had few female mujtahids, but mujtahidas, but not too many. but most of them are men. A mujtahid will go to the Quran, will go to the hadith, will go to what previous scholars have said. But in many instances, we get newer issues like bonds and shares. The Quran has got nothing to say about bonds and shares or about insurances. And therefore, it is aql, reasoning, which is used in deriving laws. So we should not undermine the rule of reasoning. In fact, there are different principles within Islam, within the usul al-fiqh, which tells us how to use reason. There is one particular principle that you may have heard of, that if there is no hukm on something, if we don't find any way of knowing whether something is halal or haram, is it halal or haram for you? It is halal for you. It is based on this particular principle, qubh iqab bila bayan, which means basically, qubh means evil, iqab means to punish. It is evil to punish somebody without telling that person what the law is. In other words, Allah cannot punish us for doing something if He doesn't tell us that it's haram to do. He cannot punish us for not doing something unless He tells us it's wajib to do it. And how do we derive this principle? Based on our reason. That reason tells us that because Allah is just, He cannot punish us to do for something without telling us whether it is halal or haram. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. And indeed, this is what we call the principle of bara, where the reason tells us that God cannot punish you without warning you in the first place. Obedience in itself, if we feel that, well, we've heard, we listen, and we just obey, in itself is not sufficient. Why? Because if it was sufficient, then the Quran would simply have said, obey, without telling us to reason, to think. The fact that the Quran emphasizes the power of reasoning so much tells us that there is a very important role to play for aql. Knowledge, my friends, has to leave a deep imprint on a person. The Quran tells us, we have recited it, I'm sure, many of us today. مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ حُمِلُوا التَّوْرَاةَ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَحْمِلُوهَا كَمَثَلِ الْحِمَارِ يَحْمِلُ أَسْفَارًا. The parable or the example of those who were given the Torah, that is the Torah, but they did not carry it. In other words, they learned it, but they did not carry that Torah with them. كَمَثَلِ الْحِمَارِ is just like donkeys. This is the parable the Quran uses. Who just bear books. You know a donkey? He's got a lot of books with him, but not too much knowledge. So in other words, knowledge should be within you, not just on you. And therefore, what the Quran is telling us that we should not only have that knowledge, but engage with that knowledge. The Quran uses the example of a donkey. كَمَثَلِ الْحِمَارِ يَحْمِلُ أَسْفَارًا. Just like donkeys that actually carry books, but they don't know much. You cannot go and ask a donkey too many questions. And therefore, the important point being this, that do not just carry knowledge with you, but you learn it and be with it. Do not just memorize books. Put that knowledge and create a wisdom out of it. The very famous example is given of Ghazali. Ghazali died in a year that you cannot forget, 1111, right? Very simple. And it is said that one day he was moving in the desert and some robbers came and got hold of him. And he had some books with him. So they took everything that he had, including his books. Ghazali said, look, you can take everything, but don't take away my books with me. They said, why not? He says, because that's where my knowledge is. You take away my books, and my knowledge is not there. The robbers laughed at him, said, what kind of knowledge is this? Which is so dispensable that we can take it away from you so easily. In other words, knowledge must not be only outside you. It must be inside you. The example is given of a mullah who had a mashallah big turban, and a lady came and asked him certain questions. And the mullah, poor mullah, could not answer. And therefore the lady got a bit angry, says, you mullah have such a big turban on you. What's the point of having a turban? You cannot even answer my questions. At that point, the mullah took off the turban and put it on her. And says, now you have the turban, now you answer the question. The point being that knowledge does not lie in the turban. It lies in the head. Sallu ala Muhammad. Within a scholar, we look not only at knowledge, the sense of aql, but also piety. Remember this much, in Islam, the two go hand in hand. Remember I was saying last night that a person can be very knowledgeable, but yet be a jahil at the same time. In other words, knowledge must go hand in hand with morality. We look at a person not only at what he knows, what she knows, but how he or she behaves. It is said that a tree which has more fruits bends more, because of the weight of the fruits. An alim who has more knowledge is actually supposed to be humble, more humble. The more you know, the more humble you're supposed to be. Haven't you seen? I have seen alim, the more they know, unfortunately, the more arrogant they become. But it's the opposite. Islamically, the more a person knows, the more humble he or she is supposed to be. You'll recall that dua that we recite in after Salatul Asr. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-ilmi la yanfa. Oh my Lord, protect me from that knowledge which does not benefit me. In other words, knowledge is supposed to have a deep imprint on your character as a person. You can be as learned as if you like, but if it does not alter the character of a person, that knowledge, oh Allah, protect me from it. In the Islamic tradition also, a teacher is not only a teacher, he's a mentor. I remember when I went to Qom first to study in 1983, and I went with a typical Western mindset, that we have to pay for everything. This is what we do here. Even if you talk to a lawyer, you have to pay here $350 an hour. But in any case, so I went to my teachers and I asked them, how much do I pay you for this, for teaching me independently classes? And he says, what are you talking about? I said, well, you're spending your time. He says, we do have fees, but our fees are very different. What you learn, you have to transmit it to others. This is the heritage of the Ahlul Bayt. The fact that knowledge has come from the Imams is because whatever the ulama have learned, their zakat, if you like, their fees, is to transmit knowledge to others. And that knowledge must come with taqwa in itself, with moral probity. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alim. In the West, many a time, a person is known by where he or she studies. I studied at Harvard, I studied, McMaster or whatever. Not McMaster. But in the Islamic tradition, I teach there. In the Islamic tradition, you are known not by where you studied as much as who you studied under. Because of the close connection between knowledge and the teacher, between a student and a teacher. And therefore, even when the ijazah is transmitted, the ijazah, I'm not talking of ijazah of khums here, I'm talking of the ijazah that a teacher issues to a student. Because before a student comes in front of you, a Maulana, he normally would have an ijazah to teach, ijazah to transmit hadith, or ijazah to do ijtihad. Why that ijazah? Ijazah literally means what? Permission, exactly. The person has been given the permission because the teacher certifies not only to his knowledge, but also to his moral probity. That person is ethical enough. It doesn't mean that he should be perfect, but at least he doesn't go around sinning in public. So the transmission is not only the knowledge, but more importantly, the personality of the teacher. A wise sage was once asked as to why he loves his teacher more than his parents. He said, my parents brought me from up there to down here. My teacher took me from down here to up there. In other words, he nourished me. He uplifted my soul. In other words, we're not only teaching a person, but also nourishing and culturing the soul of a person. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alim. That's why ulama or ilm, one who reasons, play a central role in Islam, because they are the link between the books and the masses. Most of us, we don't read Arabic. Even if we do read Arabic, or if our books in English, we rarely ever open books. Most of the time these days, before it was just a majlis, these days it's WhatsApp and YouTube and so on. But more importantly, the ulama are the link between the text and the consciousness of the masses. It is because of this, by the way, we always insist that the ulama must be free and independent, not at the masses, or they should not be concentrated with the scholars or with the governments. They should not be dependent on them, I should say, on the masses or on the government. This is one of the key elements. The Sunni ulama we have found in historically, especially in the Ottoman period, they were free, but they had their income from the waqf property, waqf endowments. But the government, the Ottoman governments, the sultans, they confiscated the waqf. Because of that, the ulama in the Sunni tradition became dependent on the governments for the income. Mutahari, on the other hand, Allama Mutahari, as some would call him Ayatollah, he complains. Now, if I would have said that, what would have happened to me. But he says it, that there are too many pseudo-alims who wear the clerical robe. And he continues, the ulama, the Shia ulama, are dependent on the masses for their finances, whereas the Sunni ulama are dependent on the government. He complains very clearly that sometimes, many a time, an alim wants to say something, but he's scared. Because if he knows, if he says it, what will happen. Mafi fulus, as they say. Therefore, because of that, he says, the ulama are the mercy of the masses. They are not the mercy of the government. What did he propose, interestingly? Mutahari said there should be a collective fund. In other words, the ulama should not be dependent on the masses. Rather, the masses should be giving into a collective fund from which an alim gets paid. Simply because he felt that an alim should be free to say what he wants. I'll give you an example. I don't know how far it's true, but I've heard this many a time. That Ayatollah Burujardi was against some of these rituals, the Ma'tam rituals I'm talking about, where you draw blood and zanjir and qamar zani and so on. And the masses told him, says, we will do taqleed of you for 364 days a year. But one day, the day of Ashur, we're not in your taqleed. And because of the influences of the masses on the people. We can see very clearly then how the ulama, the ilm, has to be free and independent. Mutahari and Allama Ayatollah Muhammad Baqir Sadr went even further, by the way. It is amazing how they had this great foresight in the 1960s. We're talking of something that was spoken in 1960s. They said even this idea of marja taqleed, with one marja, with his, close followers and son-in-laws and sons with him, this should go in favor of a collective marja'iyat. They did not say that we should not have marjas. They said we should have a collection of marjas who should give a common opinion so that people get less confused. This was said, I think, as I say, in the 1960s. Until today, it has not been implemented. Our laws then are built not only on knowledge but on aql. What is important here is to understand the role of aql or reasoning in our behavior and in our laws. Siratul uqala that you see there, sira means the behavior. Uqala is the plural of aqil. In other words, the behavior of people who are rational human beings. Can we derive a law based on how people behave? In other words, if we do not have a text, we do not have anything in the Quran, we do not have anything in the Hadith, can we derive laws based on the behavior of rational human beings? There are some who say yes. For example, Ayatollah Khomeini says the whole principle of taqleed. How do we know that taqleed is wajib? There are a few hadiths, yes. But there's nothing in the Quran which tells us that taqleed is wajib, by the way. Even the hadiths are not very clear cut. According to Ayatollah Khomeini, that the strongest point we have in favor of taqleed is because the uqala do it. Uqala meaning people of reason, rational human being. Reason tells us that in any field, whether it is in pharmacy, economics, accountancy, you go to an expert. Similarly, in religion, you need to go to an expert in a particular field to know what the law is. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alayhi. Another salawat, please. Our old ulama, by the way, the olden days used to also say that even a hadith which runs contrary to your aql should at least be questioned, if not rejected. Now things don't always work like that. But they said that because if there is a conflict between a hadith and aql, then at least question. And unless we know for sure that they came from a ma'soom, then we have to reject it. This centrality of aql then also tells us that we have to be moral and we have to be just. Simply because Islam says, as I was saying last night, Islam says what justice says. Justice doesn't say what Islam says, because justice is a common category which is there for all religion. Justice comes first because it is ingrained and cultivated in all human beings. It is aql that tells us that Allah is just. We know that God is just not because God says He's just. We know Allah is just not because Allah says He's just, but because our reasoning will tell us that Allah has to be just, because He has created reason. He is our being. Whenever we see somebody who is unjust, then we run away from it, because our aql tells us that this is wrong. And therefore, as I was saying yesterday, that we cannot have a fatwa which is immoral or unjust. Our religion, which we believe is universal, tells us also that the law must expand, not contract. Contrary to what we may think, rigid, that many of us have a very rigid, narrow understanding of Islamic law. We'll talk about the difference between Sharia and fiqh tomorrow, inshallah. But as our religion is universal, then even as our consciousness expands, circumstances change, the law must address the issues in that particular time. It cannot contract. And one thing that we have to understand, that Islamic law was not always formed by the text. Many a time Islamic law was formed by what was not in the text. As long as what was imported was not in violation of the Quran or violation of the Hadith, it was accepted. The experience of all Muslims tells us that apart from ibadat, when it comes to mu'amalat, to become Islamic, and we've talked about Islamic many a time, it did not have to originate from the text, that is from the Quran or from the Hadith. As long as it was not in violation of the scripture, it was all right. So for example, and it's amazing how we make things which were cultural or historical, we make it sacred. The whole idea of the caliphate. You heard of the caliphate? Khalifa? There are quite a few people of those who love the Khalifa living in California, by the way. They call it California. That's one of my jokes. I'm sorry. You have to put up with all these jokes. But in any case then, the caliphate was a humanly constructed institution. There is nothing divine about the caliphate. It is not mentioned in the Quran in the sense of an institution. We are all the caliphs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are all the representative of God. But the khilafah we are talking of here is an institution that was created by Muslims because it served them in history, which is nothing wrong in itself. But when the Khilafat was destroyed by Ataturk in 1924, you think that Islam had been destroyed. There was a big hue and cry. And he said, look, we don't need this Sultan and Khalifs anymore. If you want him, you can have him. And nobody would have him. And therefore the Khilafat was destroyed. Even the question, as I said, of Hilal, Minaret, and so on, the Mihrab. Again, people think it's a very sacred thing. Mihrab, there was no Mihrab during the time of the Prophet. It was later created for a place where the Imam would lead the prayer. What I'm trying to say is that many things were imported within Islam which were not necessarily part of Islam. But these laws must connect with society. As societies change, so does the law. There is a principle called al-ijtihad bi-zaman wal-makan. In other words, ijtihad is supposed to be based on zaman, which is time, and place. As time and place change, so does the ijtihad. There is also another important principle, al-alimu bizamanihi, that the alim has to be according to his time, not talking about the past all the time. Part of the issue here is that we are living in the past, I would say. This is my own understanding. Mutahari says very clearly, in Persian, he says, fatwa dihati buya dihati midahad. Meaning that the fatwa of a village smells like a village. And he's right, because an alim who gives a fatwa in a village is giving within his context. But if he goes to Tehran, which is a major city, sometimes those fatwas do not work because he was responding to a particular issue in a particular village. It doesn't work like that in Tehran or in a major metropolis city. So fatwa dehati buya dehati midahad, that the fatwa of a village has a smell of a village. What many times I think that we are doing is that we are applying the old fiqh, and again we will talk about the difference between fiqh and sharia tomorrow inshallah, in the new diaspora. Diaspora, by the way, means a place where you are away from home. Many a time our laws were formed, our ulama, who are great ulamas by the way, but they were talking about a situation where Muslims were in the majority. Now we are in the minority. To give you one or two examples, our books say, now this was given in a particular context where there was rivalry between Muslims and Christians. If you go, for example, to Jerusalem, you will see that the Dome of the Rock is taller than any other building, at that time at least. Because the Christians had a church, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where they believed that Jesus was crucified. Whether he was crucified there is another issue. But they had a church. When the Muslims came, they built the Dome of the Rock taller or higher than the church. Because in the Muslim understanding, no building can be higher than a Muslim building. Now that law doesn't apply today because we have a building which is 100 stories, right? They used to believe that a Muslim cannot wash a Jewish toilet, but a Jew can wash a Muslim toilet. Now, this was at a time, as I say, where Muslims and Jews and Christians were in conflict. But those laws are no longer applicable today. Can we say, for example, that a Muslim cannot wash a Jewish toilet in today's world? No, we cannot do that. And therefore, some of these laws, like the one that I have there, so on, these are in a process of revision now. I had mentioned Ayatollah Fayaz, Ishaq Fayaz, a close student of Ayatollah Al-Khoui in Najaf, who is normally considered as conservative, but now he's coming up with more daring issues. The issue here, for example, to show you how aql can be used for deriving the laws, is of women being judges. Now, there is absolutely nothing in the Quran which tells you that women cannot be judges, by the way. Nothing in the Hadith either that tells you that women cannot be judges. But jurists or scholars who wrote in the 9th and 10th century, in those days, with all due respect, women were not learned at all. They were not educated. So women were seen as emotional, weak, and therefore it was stated that women cannot be judges. Now, I don't know how many of you watch this show called Judge Judy. That lady is a tough cookie. In fact, she is stronger than many men that I know, male judges. So I'm not talking about Fayaz with Judge Judy, he just says it, that clearly that women can also be strong judges. This idea that women are emotionally weak and so on, women tend to be more weak. But when you are a judge, you are a judge. And therefore, even on the question of marja'iyah, whether a woman can be a marja or no, he says that marja'iyah depends on your skills and your knowledge and your aql, not on your gender. You can see how the direction that we are moving towards. And when it comes to many other laws, and I don't wish to go into the details of all these different laws, but the question of, for example, a woman has a right to divorce or not. Many a time you have heard, I have experienced, because these cases come to me many a time. A man can simply say talik, 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 and kwisha mambo. Then he's done. He just divorces his wife. Whereas if a woman wants to divorce, it is a major, major issue. Sanai, Ayatollah Sanai, has come up with new laws based on the principle of uqala, of people, reasonable people. He says reasonable people will say that since Islam talks of justice, it would be unfair and unjust to deny a woman the same rights as a man has as far as divorce is concerned. So just as a man, simply because he fancies another woman, for example, I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm saying that it's possible for a man to just say to a woman that that a man can marry another woman. A woman can also marry another man by giving divorce to her husband, provided she gives back the mahr itself. Sallu ala Muhammad. I have to be careful, this thing is being taped now. So, Ayatollah Makarim Shirazi, for example, has rejected the notion that non-Muslims are najis. He says, on the contrary, and again, he's a major Ayatollah in Qom. He says they are not necessarily najis. How many times have you been told that before you start eating, namak khawanu, and you finish eating, thoruk namak chakhwanu, that you should have salt before you eat and after you finish food? Shamsuddin, who is also an Ayatollah, says that this tradition applies to Arabia where you need salt, but there is nothing holy about salt in itself. The Prophet used to have it because it would provide you with much needed energy in an Arab context. But now if you are in a little village in the north of Norway, you do not need necessarily to have salt before or after, although it is sunnah anyway, it's not wajibat. My friends, Islam does not need change. It is our understanding of Islam that needs change. We tend to think of Islam as something which is static, which is rigid. On the contrary, it is far from that. My time is running short, inshallah. We will continue tomorrow. But in short then, we need to see Islam in a broader framework. And most importantly, the role of aql in understanding Islam. In the past, and I'm sure you've experienced it too, anytime you question anything, in the olden days, you were smacked on your face. You kafir, how dare you ask? Now, we are encouraged to ask. That Islam has told us that you use aql in understanding a religion, that you enter religion through your aql. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alim. Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Sallallahu alayka ya ibn Rasulillah. Ruhi wa jismi wa arwahul alamina lakal fida. Ya gharib, ya madloom, ya shahida bi Karbala. Assalamu alayka ya sariya dam sakiba. Assalamu alayka ya sahibul musibatu ratiba. This is a very beautiful ziyarat that we recite for Imam Hussein. That peace be upon you, O one who faced continuous musibah on the day of Ashur. لَقَدْ طَيَّبَ اللَّهُ بِكَ التُّرَابِ وَأَوْضَحَ بِكَ الْكِتَابِ. That this earth has become pure, Ya Aba Abdullah, because you are lying in it. وَأَوْضَحَ بِكَ الْكِتَابِ. That the book of God has become clear to us because of you. مَا خَابَ مَنْ تَمَسَّكَ بِكَ. The one who has sought allegiance or refuge in you will never be disappointed, Ya Aba Abdullah. Allama Iqbal, the one who said that Islam comes to life every Muharram through Karbala, because remembrance of Karbala is part of our ibadat. Just as Salat purifies our souls, Karbala makes us morally pure. It tells us not only that we should be dedicated to Allah, but Karbala tells us one other thing, that where there is wrong, you cannot afford to keep quiet. Do something, write something, or at least feel something. As somebody said very correctly, that if you have nothing to die for, you have nothing to live for. We must all have certain principles that we are prepared to give our lives for. Otherwise, our lives become meaningless. As Aradarana Hussein, Tomorrow is the 7th day of Muharram. That was the day when fresh orders came from Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad that remove Hussein from the river. So much so that he will not taste water, just as Uthman died thirsty, so will Hussein. They were bringing back the past as if Imam Hussein was responsible for Uthman dying thirsty. On the contrary, he was not. But they wanted to take revenge. They were wanting to take revenge on Ali ibn Abi Talib for what Imam Ali did at Badr. They wanted to take revenge against Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein. And the only way that they could do it was through Hussein, the plains of Karbala. When the commandment came from Umar ibn Sa'd that you will move your tents, and by the way, Imam Hussein had many tents because there were many people in Imam Hussein's campaign. There were, in some reports, up to 200 people. There were at least 50 to 60 tents that had to be moved. Many a time we see through the riwayat that people were telling him from within Imam Hussein's camp, they were asking him, shall we fight now? The enemy is fewer in number. Hussein said, I will never ever start the fighting. Hussein will not begin the fighting. I do not want to be judged in history that I fought with them. On the contrary, Hussein sought peace up to the last minute. Even on the day of Ashur, as we shall see, Hussein came to his enemies with a camel. He did not ride a camel, he brought a camel. In the olden Arab culture, when you bring a camel without riding on it, it was a sign that you came for peace, not for war. He brought the Quran with him. Oh, people, judge me by this Quran. Have I ever violated this? As I said, even Abbas on the 7th day, he wanted to fight, but Imam Hussein said, no, if we have to move our tents further away, we will do so. On the eve of Ashur, Hussein gathers his companions. This was almost like the eve of Qiyamah. As we shall recite on Monday night, he told them very clearly that this is going to be our last night. You may leave me now. There's no bay'ah. One by one, the companions stood up and they promised Imam Hussein that we will die in front of you. We will be cut into pieces, but we will not leave you under any circumstance. As the Imam was preparing for the night, one young boy came to him, the nephew of Imam Hussein. And he says, Mawla, oh my uncle, will I die also tomorrow? Shall I die? Because I would like to give my life for you. Imam Hussein wants to test Qasim. He is not even baligh. He's a young boy. Ya Qasim, kayfal maut indak. How do you see death? What do you think of death? Qasim says, Ahla min al-asal. It is sweeter than honey. I will die, but I will not live after you. On the day of Ashur, Qasim came again and again in front of Imam Hussein. Oh my uncle, I want to give my life for you. Qasim was a sign of Hassan to Hussein. How could Hussein let his nephew go? Finally, Qasim goes to his mother, Farwa, and he says, oh my mother, my uncle is not allowing me to go and fight. Can you suggest something? The mother opens a ta'weez, which was a letter. In that letter said, oh Qasim, whenever my brother is in trouble, give him this letter and he will allow you to go and sacrifice yourself on my behalf. Qasim brings that ta'weez in front of Hussein. Hussein reads that letter of his brother and he says, oh Qasim, I cannot stop you anymore. Hussein starts crying in remembrance of his brother. Hussein dresses up Qasim and puts him on the horse. Qasim is so young, according to the riwayat, that his feet cannot even reach the saddle. Oh Qasim, Khuda Hafiz, keep looking at me while you're going. Qasim comes and fights a noble battle, a young boy. But when he's surrounded from all sides and he's attacked, Qasim falls on the ground. For the first time on the day of Ashur, Hussein gets very angry. He attacks the enemy from all sides. And he says, how dare you attack my nephew? As the army retreats from Hussein, They go and trample over the body of Qasim. When Hussein reaches Qasim, he says, "Oh Qasim, I am sorry to hear that you asked for me. You sought my help, but I was not able to help you." Qasim's body now has been trampled. When Hussein brings back the body of Qasim, it is no longer in the same shape that Qasim went to. It has been trampled all over. And then Hussein brings the body of Qasim. "Oh, my Farwa, oh ladies, come and receive the body of Qasim."